not only a topic about journalists and not only a topic about China. It's a topic about freedom of expression and of information all over the world today. When I lost my visa in end of 2015, it's because I had written an article that the Chinese government didn't like. It was about the Uyghur region. It was about the way the Uyghurs were treated at that time. It was before that the camps and the concentration camps and everything began, but it was already pretty harsh. So this article displeased them, so they decided to not renew my visa, and I was de facto expelled at the end of 2015. But until then, I can say that it wasn't easy. But we could go to places, even to Tibetan areas, not Tibet with the Tibet region, capital Lhasa, but other regions with Tibetan inhabitants. It was open and it was quite okay to go there. Usually when you go in those places, you're always followed by a number of people, of cars, etc., etc. But I can say that in 2013, 14, 15, when I went there quite often, I could manage without being followed, and I could meet people, I could talk to people, which is, as I spoke to my colleagues there in Beijing, in Shanghai today, it's quite impossible today. It's not only because they have put so many other so much more, cops, etc., followers of every foreign journalist who goes there, who goes in those places, but also because of the surveillance on telephones and the cameras and all this network system of surveillance everywhere. So that it's interesting, it's paradoxical. One of my colleagues who went recently to Kashgar, he felt that it was a bit less than 1 year previously. He was less followed. He could almost, go by the city without being followed. But then he understood that they were followed in another way. It was all this system of cameras everywhere. Anyway, it seems that in those places, 5 years ago, people would talk to you. People would not be, defiant. They would answer to the questions, and especially ordinary people. But nowadays, it's quite impossible. People do not answer to foreign journalists. So foreign journalists are left, in fact, it's almost that they should be in other places and continue to work. It would be more or less the same, in fact, because China is making this craft impossible. It's becoming more and more impossible to cover China. And this is important not only for foreign journalists, not only for journalism. It's important because otherwise there is no way to know what's happening in China. The Chinese journalists have been muted already. It's been already, many years. They cannot write anything. And even the social media, they can't write. Exceptionally, during the COVID outbreak in Wuhan, we could see some civil journalists writing on media, on social media, but that was, just a small window, and then it closed. And there is no way to be aware of what's going on in China if there are no foreign journalists. And given the fact that China is more and more actively seeking to be present in our world, in our side of the world, and seeking to influence, and even more, maybe even more, whatever. And it's very important that we know what's going on there, so that we can be able to tackle what they are planning to do here.
Well, that sounds very much reasonable. I mean, like, I'm a lot in touch, with people from Tibet, and I'm honestly not able to explain them how is it actually possible that it is almost impossible to get access to Tibet, and if so, to actually speak with people over there, while sometimes like Chinese citizens and even operatives of their intelligence services are moving freely across Europe, asking for whatever they want, getting whatever information they want. So I believe there should be certain like reciprocity in that sense, to really like, we are interested in what's happening in China. We are part of the same world. We are part of the same planet, and we expect that we will get the information. I mean, like, not only for simply civil purposes, but also very much for like scientific. I mean, like, how do we actually know what happens to the environment, what happens to the ice in Himalaya mountain when we are and not allowed to go there and just do a simple research? That's weird.
That's correct.
Well,
I would like just to say that the theme of reciprocity was a very important one when I was in China, and I was also at the board of the FCCC. And I remember that we talked a lot about this reciprocity thing, and we never quite could convince our own governments that that was something reasonable to ask.
Yep. That's surprising. I would maybe give a floor to our next guest, who is William Young from the Deutsche Welle. So we would really see your experience.
Yeah, so my experience of reporting on China actually started when I was working with Mega in 2018 at BuzzFeed. At the time, it was kind of like, I think things in the situation in China was really changing really fast. And I think we were trying to see, like, if it's possible for her to maybe work with someone outside of China on some sensitive topics, because in the past, over the year before that, we have already seen a lot of censorships and like pressures on Chinese journalists working with foreign media. And so that was how I got my foot into the China reporting world. And I still actually remember the day that when we learned that Mega was not able to go back to China. We were actually together in Hong Kong attending an event, and it was really just like that. She was only, and she was not even planning to leave China for a long time, just for a weekend. And then the next thing she learns, she's outside of China for many months. And then I think that explains the unprecedented situation that foreign journalists will be facing, and also the risks that they will be facing. A lot of the times, it's even like they won't even be allowed to go back to move their things, or to properly have a closure to their time in China, and all of a sudden, that's just the end. And I think for me is like over the last 2 years, before 2020, I kind of felt like I was an interesting role in the China reporting world, because I was so close to China, but at the same time, as a Taiwanese national, I would never be able to work in China as a journalist. Even for any foreign media, even for Chinese media, it would be really hard. And let alone reporting on some of the subjects that I've been reporting on, which is a lot of the civil society, human rights related stories. I started learning about reporting on Xinjiang because I worked with Mega, and then later on I follow up on that. And then I was in Hong Kong in 2019. And that was really another shocking year that we really saw the censorship and the crackdown on freedom of speech just arrived in Hong Kong all of a sudden. And journalists being at the front line were being treated as criminals and suspects, and we faced all kinds of very different and difficult and even sometimes dangerous situations that you would not expect. In the past, when we go to Hong Kong and cover a rally, you would just feel like it's a very peaceful march that you can just walk with the people, talk to them and chat with them and then get some colors of the march. But in 2019, after the first 2 weekends, basically everything turns into you need to have all the gears before your organization is willing to send you out there. You need to be able to know how to speak the language to a certain level so you know where to hide, where to go when the tear gas and the rubber bullets started flying over your head. And over time, when we travel to Hong Kong, we just, you know, our luggage just basically becomes like thicker and thicker. And then, so by 2020, in the past, I felt like I was the loner in the China reporting world because I was reporting about China from the outside. And in March 2020, when the more than a dozen American journalists got kicked out, including not being able to report in Hong Kong and Macau, which were also unprecedented because in the past, when journalists can no longer report from China, Hong Kong was the ideal place for them to continue their reporting. But then the Chinese government basically moved the red line, moved the goalposts even further than before. And so the only place that makes sense is Taiwan, which in the past you would never imagine that we will suddenly have so many foreign journalists from some of the most well-known international media outlets being sent or being forced to come to Taiwan. Jokingly, we call them refugees, but for someone who reports on China, I think it's really, really sad because a lot of the access that they used to be able to get that I would probably never be able to get is so valuable that you know how hard it is for them to be able to earn that and to fight for that. And then seeing them right now here with me still, most of them are still here in Taiwan more than a year after the spat between the US and China happened. And basically it's like journalists suddenly just become the collateral damage. They don't have the control of, the say over it. And then they also don't really have the leverage to really fight for their rights to supposedly get the access back into a country that they're being appointed to, being assigned to. And then over the last year, we see more of the two Australian journalists forcing to leave. And then we see John Sethworth, he came here to Taiwan early this year. It suddenly just seems like reporting from Taiwan on China becomes a new reality that, foreign journalists are having to face. And then we also now have even more foreign journalists who are waiting for their visas to be approved in China. They're waiting here in Taiwan. And so this suddenly, I'm actually now the president of the Foreign Correspondents Club. And so we see this rapid change of our membership dynamic, the conversations that we're focusing on. It's interesting, but at the same time, it's concerning because when Hong Kong and China are no longer the places where topics like the human rights, freedom of expression in China can be discussed. In Hong Kong now, if you hold an event like that, you can be violating national security law, and it's applied to all nationals, no matter where you're from. You can be sued, you can be charged, you can be sentenced, you can be detained under that law. Even if you're outside of Hong Kong, you can still be held accountable under that law. So all of a sudden, this is the new reality that we're facing. And I think for many of us, we're still trying to make sense of this and then try to see how long this is going to last, or is this just going to become the new reality as China tries to really push its ambition outward. Yeah, sorry if I say a little bit too much, but.
To be honest, this is kind of surprising situation. So you already say that actually these journalists are moving from China to Taiwan. I mean, by all means, this is another country. So they are actually no longer able to operate in the country they were assigned. This is really a ridiculous situation. Well, nevertheless, maybe there are some more questions also from our followers. So if you are willing to raise a question, please do not hesitate to use the chat on the YouTube. we are collecting that, and we will answer the question at the end of our session after all the initial talks. And now I'm slowly getting to the last of the initial talks that will be provided by my dear colleague Marketa, who is working in the Committee for Foreign Affairs in the European Parliament and has a lot of experience with digital issues and sharing of the information in the international relations.
All right, thank you, Mikuláš. And of course, I do not want to destroy the format. However, I need to point out that I've seen Mega to switch on her microphone. So if she wants to actually react to William, maybe, I don't know. Sorry, I don't want to break your format. I just saw it. So I also want to give the opportunity to have the discussion, flow naturally.
I was just going to add very quickly, and I'm very sorry I don't want to take up your time, but just to expand a bit on some of the points that William made in order to kind of better frame this discussion for people who are coming in with not having watched it as closely. So essentially, starting in a lot of people think that journalists were always being thrown out of China, and this has never been a country that was super friendly to freedom of the press. And that is true to an extent, but essentially in the kind of post Tiananmen Square movement era, the government was not throwing out foreign journalists at a very fast pace. And starting in about 2011 or 2012, occasionally journalists like Ursula and myself would lose their accreditation. It seemed in retaliation to particular things that were done. And that was a thing that was very hard to predict. There were a lot of kind of politics that were happening that weren't necessarily visible. But it was happening at a kind of a slow enough pace that it wasn't seriously impacting the quality of coverage, as an overall thing. And that's one of the things that has really started to change, which William alluded to. So last year, I think there's 18 foreign correspondents that we know of that have lost their accreditation. The real number is likely higher than that because news organizations want to continue to get accreditation for new people, so they are disincentivized from making that public. On top of that, there have been additional reports that correspondents that have stayed in the country have been issued much shorter visas, right? 1 to 3 months. So if you think about that in practice, if you're moving to another country and you're being told, okay, actually you can only stay in 1 to 3 month increments, what if you have children that are school age? How are you going to unpack your stuff and buy furniture? It's a real disincentive to people who want to cover the country from inside. And the third thing I wanted to mention is what has the pandemic's impact been on all of this? So I guess I can say anecdotally, based on my contacts who are still there, I think everywhere in the world, the pandemic has obviously impacted mobility and access for journalists. In China, I think it has given authorities with it, under the government, additional excuses to bar access. So a couple of forms that can take is, the local government in some, in a town or a city where somebody has gone to report will say, you have to either quarantine or you actually can't be here because it's a health risk. The second thing that will happen is that the source will cancel the interview. I think it was a very significant number of correspondents that reported that this had happened last year. I think upwards of 40% said that this had happened to them at least once. And then on top of that, more correspondents than ever have reported that they are concerned about digital surveillance and the use of digital tools to restrict their work. So if you look at the kind of overall picture of this, what you see is a kind of the diminishing of access for journalists in the country is proceeding at a very quick rate. I guess William has already alluded to this, but it would be a shame if we didn't talk about the impact of on Chinese nationals as well. We've seen the detention last year of Hayes Fan, who was a reporter for Bloomberg. She is a Chinese passport holder, and when someone like that is detained, it sends a message to all Chinese passport holders that are working in the media that the same thing could happen to them. And that is a very worrying signal as well.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
I'm happy that you spoke instead of me, because that was very, very important, enlightening. So now I will follow in the format that Mikuláš planned ahead. So sorry for this. Well, given, of course, that you are actually from practice, and I am in the European Parliament and within the European Union, I think we should more listen to you. But also that is why I would like to focus on what the European Union is doing, and maybe also already ask a few questions to you on what can we do, or how can we help. So to begin with, well, I'm sorry to say that the European Union has done seemingly everything we could to make the CCP understand that our business interests in China far outweigh any other principles and values, such as independent media and investigative journalism. Of course, it doesn't count for everyone, but we are not trying enough, let's say. So my first thought is, how, as an MEP, can I affect the situation? And the freezing of the investment agreement has had seemingly no effect. And equally, the recognition of the genocide in Xinjiang by increasingly more member states also does not seem to have any moderating effect on the violence and brutality of the CCP. So I'm wondering what you think of reciprocal actions, for example, removing accreditation or visas for Chinese state media staff in the EU, or even banning some Chinese media in the EU altogether. An eye for an eye leaves us all blind, as we know, but such measures could increase the cost of kicking out our journalists and maybe even reverse it. And if not, possible alternative might be open source investigations that, for instance, Bellingcat is conducting. Or, of course, that is also a question to you, whether you think so. And speaking to foreign reporters is a criminal offense in Hong Kong, as it appears. Just recently, bail was denied for former pro-democracy lawmaker Claudia Mo, jailed for allegedly violating the national security law. And the court documents cite numerous media appearances and conversations with reporters from outlets like BBC World and even WhatsApp as evidence to deny her bail. So given the technological advances in surveillance technologies, not least the imported or stolen technology from the US and the EU, is it still possible to keep sources anonymous? And at this point, I would also like to point out that the EU is finally starting to at least recognize the fate of some European cyber surveillance technology imported to China, and the recast of the dual use regulation should put a halt on that, or at least control it better. But of course, is it technologically still feasible to be a reporter operating in China and keep your sources secure? That is the question. And maybe to conclude with an obvious question for the benefit of both me and the host, Mikuláš, has the delegation of the European Union to China played any role in your work, supportive or otherwise? And what would you wish the delegation or the European Parliament would do to support you? I would really love to hear that. Thank you.
Maybe I would answer to the question about the role of the delegation. When my problem appeared, it was in 2015 in November, October, November. And then at that time, the delegation was very active, and they organized some meetings of the ambassadors of the European Union countries. And in fact, they were ready to do something more public and to go public about their what they asked, but they couldn't do it because not all the countries agreed, and especially my country did not agree. So there is a problem there. I mean, if you are still depending on all the members to be okay, to be all right, to do something, we will never do anything, I think. So maybe your first, as MPs, I mean, what I would suggest is to get rid of this way of voting things. Unanimity will never work. It has to be a majority, something. Okay, that's the basic thing. The second thing is that yes, our countries are more interested in commercial benefits than in any other benefits. And this is very short-sighted, because even our commercial benefits will be quite quickly very in jeopardy because we are losing everything, and we are ceding all the everything that we can do in front of China. So this is a very bad way of calculating things. It's very short-sighted, and it is also, I think it's only the MPs of the European Parliament who can change this. The governments themselves will not do it. I don't believe it. So if you elected MPs, you are able to change that, to have some kind of constitution of the European Union, which puts, the principal values in the first place and then the others. Okay, that maybe could work. What I'm saying is probably you can't do anything against China besides blocking the vote of a commercial accord or an investment accord. But you can do much on a more profound and basic way. That's what I came to believe after seeing how it goes. And in fact, what you did with the blocking of this investment accord was really very important. You said that it didn't change China's attitude. That's probably true for the time being, but it's a big slap. It's a huge slap. It's a huge slap in their face and on their strategy of, advancing little by little, by small steps, and getting this and that in the name of exchanges of this and exchanges of that. This has to be stopped. So this was a good beginning anyway. So I applaud to your vote.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think that's a really good point. And I think it's really important in these issues around like advocacy for freedom of the press and other fundamental rights in the China context to view it as like kind of a long time scale. Like, this is not a country that's having elections every 4 years where there's a change in leadership. This is a country with a government that's going to be sticking around probably for a while. So, I mean, a good example of this is Liu Xia, who's the wife of the Nobel laureate Liu Xiaobo, who was imprisoned for his work campaigning on behalf of democracy and human rights. And Liu Xia was advocated for years. Like she was under house arrest by governments, by outside groups, in public, in private, on like many different platforms. And for a long time, it looked like it wasn't working until one day, like she left the country, and that was that. So, I mean, these processes are very opaque to us looking at it from outside. I'm sure it's less opaque to people who work in diplomacy and are engaged in these conversations all the time. But I think it's important to recognize that even though we can't see the process working, it doesn't necessarily mean that the process is not working. It may be that it will work. And I think Ursula made a really good point about incremental changes. We see this in the context of political prisoners all the time. It may not necessarily be that advocacy by a foreign embassy gets them released, but it may be that it gets them access to better conditions, or access to a lawyer, or if they're a foreign national, access to consular official. These are all important changes. They are worth, in my opinion, they're worth advocating for. Anecdotally, I've seen it work in that way, and I think that these things are still possible. Yeah.
I guess I didn't really have that much to add because I think Mega and Ursula have both already touched on a lot of the very important things, especially when it comes to human rights. And uh, I I guess the other thing is that what I see as an encouraging sign is that Western diplomats and Western governments have been really trying to work very united in a very coordinated way over the last 2 years at least, when I have been covering so much of the trials of the very prominent human rights lawyers. The most recent one is the trial of the citizen journalist Zhang Zhan, who was sentenced to 4 years on December 28th last year. That and then we have repeatedly seen the public appearance of Western government representatives being physically present outside the courts, even if they know that they cannot make it into the courts, and also being very periodically and consistently engaging with the family members, especially the wives of some of the most prominent human rights lawyers that are still now in detention. I think these attentions given to their family members, is that it's really a level of like, I can't say full protection, but at least it gave them some safeguard that the government will not be dared to really just like disappear them one day, and they will be like not seen in the public sight. And also the ongoing work to offer or to work with the government back home, or like to get some of the prominent activists who have been put under house arrest were essentially not being able to make a living in China because they have been deprived of all different rights. Their licenses were deprived. They were not able to get any jobs because wherever they tried to get interviewed, their potential employer will be warned by the local government that if you hire this person, you will face A and B consequences. And so like the fact that these people continue to be able to have the chance to like live a new life outside of China, that means a lot. And I think this will continue to serve as a way to, I think, give the support to these very few individuals that are fighting so hard for the principles of rights and freedom that most of the democratic countries believe in. And I think all the European Union states believe in as well. And I think this will be a very important point. And then, of course, like maybe this coordinated fashion can then be reflected back into Brussels itself, or like, the European Parliament, the European like unions, other like organizations. I think this mentality and this mindset and logic will be very important when it comes to how to deal with China, not necessarily going head to head or like going tit for tat with them, but rather is to stand firm on your ground as a coordinated voice, so that when you're being, when any of your member state is being pushed or pressured, you will know what is the better way to respond. And that will, I think, not give China so much leverage to just get anything that they want.
Thank you for that. I mean, like, there is really a lot of that has to be done by the Western governments, the European Union as well. I mean, like, maybe it would be good to remind how the system currently works, because sometimes people do expect a change, but it's not really that simple. I mean, like, you mentioned also that at the beginning of your answer that there should be a majority vote instead of unanimity. I mean, that touches actually the Council of the Member States. I mean, like in the European Parliament, we have normal procedures. However, the Council of Member States has this strange habit that simply one bribed prime minister of a EU member state can easily block operating the whole bloc from doing anything, basically. And we see it in a lot of fields like the foreign policy, the tax matters, and so on. And this is actually a very painful problem. However, it cannot be easily addressed within the European Parliament, because basically they are like our counterparts. We are not kind of like we are to be, so to say, equal to them, but not overriding them. But what is important is to keep it in mind when it comes to the national elections, because this is actually like the composition of the Council of the Member States is being decided in the national elections. So be quite careful about whom you are electing for your national government, because that respective person will also affect the working of the EU and can block easily a lot of decisions. I could tell you long stories from my own country, where the prime minister is enjoying his powers in the European Council in order to suck European money without any control and any limitations. However, there will be an important occasion to address it. We are starting the conference for future of Europe, which shall discuss the reform of the EU. And I believe Marketa is the one who is very much interested in this particular topic. So maybe you can inform us what would be the, let's say, the options, how to move forward on that.
That's an interesting question. Because of course, the Conference for the Future of Europe is still also finding its way among all the European citizens and all the so-called agoras or groups that are trying to put together topics that the EU should focus on. What I know from how we coordinate, at least within the Czech Republic, because there, from the level of the whole European Parliament, there haven't been still the first meeting, so I can't talk for others. But for the Czech Republic, we are trying to coordinate or at least inform people about these possibilities and also coordinate so that they support each other's proposals, which is a very important part, because the Commission, of course, wants to but can't address everything. So it will be pretty much similar to liquid democracy. I think it's how is it called, where citizens from all over Europe can support each other's proposals. So it's good to find your supporters beforehand, where they support your proposals, remove any duplicities, so that only the proposals that has the biggest potential are voted on. But that's from the point of view of ordinary citizens, which I personally find as the most important. But from the position of the EU institutions, I can give you now much more information, as it's still in the work in progress. Yeah, I am not proud of that, but it's also the doing of pandemic, because the original idea was a lot of in-person meetings, and they didn't account for that, for this. Yeah.
Well, the whole COVID pandemic was something a little bit unplanned and complicated a lot of things, but
but
for sure.
Maybe to add quickly, also regarding the unanimity and ideally qualified majority vote that we all want, actually, is that, well, that is definitely something that at least the European Parliament, I am certain, will push for. The problem here is that there will be a lot of member states again that will disagree with this, and already several member states, sorry to already say it, but issued some kind of letter that they do not want the Conference for the Future of Europe be in any way influential on the founding agreements of the European Union. Therefore, there would be no possibility to abolish such things as the unanimity vote in the Council of Europe, European Council, sorry. So, of course, that's just a few member states talking now, and it is still possible to push against them. It is just that it will be very difficult, and this is one of the biggest barriers that we are facing. And I do not know what else to do than to really also appeal to citizens that, these governments are also representing you, and they are not here to judge, what's best for you. So if you want a qualified majority, then that should absolutely happen. That's also upon our shoulders as legislators.
I would say that for a long time, what happened in the European instances and European parliaments, people didn't really care because it was too far away, and just it was about, you know, some commercial deals and basic agreements on investment and this and that. So people didn't see in which way this was important for them. But nowadays, more and more, with the people have understood that we have to have an answer to whatever is going on, coming from those huge and dangerous and hostile countries like China, like Russia, etc. So that people just understand that if each country has to give an answer, we will never be able to tackle with this problem. So at last, the utility of the European Union is becoming more and more obvious for ordinary people. And I think that this talk of China and of Russia and everything is an important talk that will touch people's minds. And that if the countries, if the governments, they don't want to do it, if the European Council doesn't want to do it, I think the parliament can do it.
That's absolutely for sure. And I mean, like, I believe we are here all on the same page that we would gladly go for such a reform. And I mean, like, when it comes to the national parliament and national governments, we have had quite some nice agreement already some years ago in the European Pirate Party that we want to change the system, and more or less pirates from all across Europe are agreed on that we want to do it independent, whether we are from Germany, Czech Republic, France, whatsoever. I mean, like, we want to change the system. So if you want to change the system, vote for pirates. That's quite simple. Well, I mean, anyway, there were some questions provoked by from our followers by the question, and one very interesting or philosophical is actually coming from Germany. How do ordinary people notice that their right to information and their opinions are restricted? I mean, like, for us looking on China from outside, it seems to be obvious, but how do the people inside do realize it? I don't know, Ursula, want to start?
Okay, from what I know, because I have lived in China for a very long time. I have lived all in all 17 years, and I was a correspondent for 6 years. And I have studied Chinese, I speak Chinese, it's fluent. And so I have many friends, and it was very easy for me to get in touch with ordinary people. And when you talk to ordinary people, especially in China, they are really smart. This is really one of my, it's perpetuous experience. They are smart people. They understand, they know what's going on. So when you go on the social media and you see those tons and thousands of bots or idiots or whatever, that who talk like the Communist Party propaganda, they are paid. Okay, they are paid. If those people were free to talk their mind, you wouldn't have had the same result. I'm certain of that. There is some, even the most extreme of the Chinese people, there are some nationalists in China today, and it's not the character of the people, but it's something that was produced by the propaganda, the system. Okay, it calls on the nationalism. So you might find nationalists, but even them, they just don't like this government. They know that this government is limiting their action, their freedom, their thinking. They know that. So in fact, if there was a little bit of real freedom in China, the Communist Party could be toppled very quickly. That's what I think. So that's why they are so keen in putting so much control of this society. And if they want to control us outside China, it's in order to have a better control on their own society. It's in order to cut all the relationships so that their society, they can be sure that people won't have any way to react, etc. But the Chinese people are very smart and they know what's going on. They're not ignorant. They know that the information is totally under the control of the government. And it's not very difficult. If you just look at all the official papers, and there are only official papers now, you will have the same titles, even the same word by word, the same, cover stories everywhere. So people should be really stupid not to see that. And what I'm repeating, the Chinese people are really smart and they know what's going on.
Well, I'm usually defending right to copy stuff and ideas like sharing is caring, but the way how it is implemented in Chinese propaganda apparatus is obviously not going to improve the situation at all. Well, and those are really like interesting experiences. That means that actually it could happen that one day the people in China realize that the Communist Party is actually not that strong as one would expect, and there could be an alternative to what we do see now. Well, let me keep my hopes at least for that. Well, we have had some other questions coming from our followers. There is one rather technical. Do you think that hardware like Huawei and software like Zoom infrastructure outside of China poses a threat to freedom of speech? That's very much technical. I don't know who wants to raise that. Maybe Marketa, you are the one to answer that.
And could you please repeat it, because I did not catch the gist of it. Whether they think that Huawei poses threat to whom? To us or to Chinese citizens?
Huawei and Zoom infrastructure outside of China actually poses a threat to freedom of speech. I thought it is intended to ask the question about our European situation, whether it can cause troubles to us actually.
Well, naturally, there is the law, Chinese law, that makes that forces Chinese companies to provide the Chinese government with data of their users. So naturally, you have to account for that if you are using any software or product of Chinese company. The law is there, and there is nothing we can do about it. And I would be very happy if any also listeners or viewers today would take this from this meeting, that if they are using such technologies, their data can be abused in such a manner. As for Zoom, that's of course an American company as far as I know, and correct me if I am wrong, but there are of course other potential threats to our data, but I do not think that such threats are based on selling them to authoritarian regimes, such as selling them to corporations who are then trying to sell us as many products of them as they can. And of course, the whole problem with surveillance capitalism is that you can't really track what these corporations are doing with your data in general. So it is very difficult to have any control over them. So even if it is Zoom and it is American company, and we consider in Europe, America still to be quite a democratic country to some extent, then of course we also know that their legislation doesn't really protect our data, such as, for example, the Europeans' GDPR legislation. And thus we should also be aware that our data can be abused, such it happened in the case of Cambridge Analytica. for those who don't know, from listeners and viewers, it was a case where actual London-based company abused data from Facebook database of millions of users, and then pretty much, to very simplified, caused Brexiters to win, and let's say also was involved in the terrible happenings in Myanmar, and also got involved in the presidential elections between Trump and Clinton. So yeah, there's a lot of potential for any abuse, but also I don't know how to connect really Zoom with China, but maybe I am missing something. Sorry.
Well, Zoom has a part of the is partly financed. It's partly owned by China. That's why I was a bit surprised that you use Zoom for this kind of events.
We are very transparent when talking about our policies. I believe there is nothing forbidden and nothing to say. And I will be very happy should all my statements be followed by the Chinese government, sending my warm wishes to all the political representatives who will read it and see it. I don't care. I still believe we are living in a free continent, and we can do so without being afraid of any precautions. And yes, the question was raised by one of our followers, and very much it is relevant, because what we see here is the problem of being unable to, let's say, follow all the structures of companies across the world. Sometimes it's pretty blurry and complicates to identify the final beneficiaries of the data. And as said, I mean, concerning the fact that from time to time we see some armed people storming. What we see here is the problem of storming the parliament in the United States. I mean, like, it would be much better should we have better control over our data than we have right now. Mm-hmm. Maybe there is another question. I will read it as it was stated. Since we don't expect the Chinese Communist Party to change the course on human rights and freedom of press anytime soon, how does the future of reporting on China look? Is there actually a risk of the regime becoming so opaque that we soon won't be able to learn about the human rights abuses at all? How do you perceive that, actually?
I can speak to that. I think it's really important to not see this as a binary. Like, I mean, it's not going to be, most likely, no one can predict the future, but most likely this government is not going to decide next year that they completely welcome human rights reporting and completely make like a 180 transition. But a lot of human rights reporting is about like taking a little piece and kind of mitigating impacts that could be far worse. And I think that's why, like, we've seen the environment change in such a gradual way over the past 10 years. And I think that does matter. Yeah. And then I guess to speak to the point about, like, you know, what's the future of human rights reporting there? I think that it's really important to recognize that China is not like a tin pot dictatorship that does not care about its standing in the world. You know, it's the world's second largest economy. It's a UN Security Council member. It cares very, very deeply about its diplomatic relationships in the West and its economic relationships. You can see this in the Belt and Road campaign and all of the time and resources that it pours into convincing other countries to stand with its foreign policy positions. If it didn't care what other countries thought, then it wouldn't do that, right? The government wouldn't do that. So what that tells you is that it doesn't seem to me like they're keen to completely sort of isolate themselves. I think if you want to facilitate things like foreign investment in Chinese state-owned in Chinese companies, they're not state-owned companies, but sort of they're national champions, which is clearly a priority to them. You have to create an environment of like sort of some facilitation of information for investors. You need some assurance that there is a kind of a functional legal system for foreign investors there, and some kind of freedom of information. So these are all kind of incentives for the government to still allow, some kinds of reporting. Obviously, they have significantly reduced the space for it, but I think that it shows that there is like still room to do that reporting. And I guess like if I were going to make an argument to the government, I would say that I think actually everybody is losing at this point. Like if there's no correspondence base there that can report freely, then the Chinese government is also losing, because that means that there are a lot less stories about kind of really normal things in China, like the way that people live, like the economic policies and the impacts of economic policies. Like when I worked at Reuters, we used to do so many stories about things like building public infrastructure, like trains, and how that impacted rural communities, the gap between the rich and the poor, which is a really important social issue that impacts, hundreds of millions of people. All of these stories are being lost out. And the stories that end up winning are kind of big geopolitical stories about issues like Xinjiang, the South China Sea, and other kind of like high level subjects that can be reported on from outside from a policy standpoint. But the result is that the coverage becomes like kind of dehumanizing, because you don't see the actual people that are being impacted. And I think that's really a loss. So I think for those reasons, like I would hope that it's not going to end up being an environment that's sort of hermetically sealed. And then the last thing I would point out is that there has been, like, I'm lucky that I've been able to do both. Like I've reported from inside the country, and then I continue to work on China related issues, particularly on the Xinjiang issue, from outside of the country. So I know what both are like. And, I value the people that I've been able to interview over the past 2 years, who are mostly exiles in places like Kazakhstan and Turkey, who have left the region very recently. And, we've done a lot of like kind of like quote unquote like open source intelligence type work, where we look at like public satellite imagery and other public records and stuff like that to write about the mass internment camps. And you can definitely get a picture of the situation that way. But honestly, there is no substitute for being on the ground. There just isn't. So I think that it is really important to continue advocating for access on the ground. It's not irrelevant. It's not that the access is so bad that it's not even worth having, as it is in some other countries. So yeah.
I guess I just wanted to like follow up on what Mega said, which is I absolutely agree with the fact that the Chinese government's growing up, I guess authoritarian way of like managing the country, but also like expanding that authoritarianism to places like Hong Kong is really not doing it, like serving in its like, I guess, interests. Because just like Mega said, like nowadays, like every day, my coverage area is mostly China, Hong Kong, Taiwan. Like every day, 5 days of a week, I will have 4.5 stories, or even sometimes 7 stories in 5 days, that are all about how China is doing this or that to, undermine other people's interests, or like to really threaten other countries' sovereignties. That like footprint has now brought my coverage to places like Slovakia, to Australia, to places in Latin America. So that I think is probably, it's really not in the Chinese government's interest, but maybe they don't see that as a threat to themselves. But at the same time, it's like, I do also think that reporting on human rights stories from outside of China is still possible, even though I do agree with Mega that you will have very limited ability to get even more intimate when it comes to your storytelling, to your writing. But sometimes when a reporter is actually not inside China, for certain individuals who are hoping to get more outside exposures, they actually feel more free to speak to you, because they felt like the chances that the conversations or the like he will be immediately tracked down by the government is less likely, because you will not be sitting in his house. You will be on a phone call, or like at least like using some kind of like more secure, maybe not completely secure, but more secure ways to communicate. And then they feel actually less threatened to speak to you. And that way, sometimes it could lead to possible ways that you can get some unimaginable access to an exclusive story that journalists inside China will not be able to get. But I think it's also important to continue to highlight the great works that the remaining journalists in China are still doing. I wanted to go back. An example is LA Times reporter Alice Su. She was one of the first journalists who went to Inner Mongolia last year when the whole protests broke out about trying to safeguard their mother language, their culture, and she was physically attacked and threatened and even briefly detained. But she still delivered a story in a very, very courageously and I think great reporting way. And she continued to deliver that. I think for any of the correspondents that are now remaining in China, every story that they do, I think, will be of like even particular like value to the outside world for their understanding about what's actually going on inside China. There's only so much that people like us outside of China can do, and we continue to try our best to do that. But I think it's the balance of like having people inside the country to do the on the ground work that cannot really be done from outside of the country. And for those of us who are outside of the country, we will continue to find ways to tell the China related stories and paint the picture of how extensive China's influence has become, I think, in different corners of the world, and how these influences and the impact are being transformed into different ways, because it really does reach to different aspects of actually our lives, in Czech Republic, in Taiwan, in France, in London. Like we can all see like traces of that, and it's growing every single day. And so I think, like this is a teamwork. It's not just saying like, we are, those of us outside now are actually outnumber the ones that are inside, which is again, very, very sad. It's hoping that some of these temporary so-called exiles can one day make it back into China and then continue to do the work that they're supposed to be doing.
Well, I believe that would be very much reasonable, because at the end of the day, China is quite old culture. So, I mean, like restricting access to that whole sphere and that whole society is actually harming humanity itself. So I don't see the point why should Chinese government actually harm its own culture. This makes no sense, and will backfire sooner or later anyway. I mean, we are slowly getting to the point when the scheduled time will be over. So I would maybe use the opportunity and give you the time to you to maybe give some final word, if you wish, to our followers who were so kind to follow until this point. Shall we go in the same order as from the beginning, Ursula?
Well, it was mega. Moving on.
Sorry, my fault.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. This has been a really good discussion. Yeah, and yeah, I think the question of like how we didn't get too much into the policy side, but I think the question of how policymakers should respond to some of these challenges is a very interesting one. And I think that, I guess as an American, like the thinking on that has really evolved in the US. I follow the reciprocity debate out of interest, but I don't really, I think that there's good arguments on both sides, but I think that like someone said, is it an eye? I think Marketa said, is this an eye for an eye kind of thing. I'll be interested to see that now that reciprocity, quote unquote, has sort of started and become a part of US policy, albeit I guess starting under the last administration, what impact that that has on press freedom. I do think that the stakes are, as we've all said, like the stakes are very high here because there are so few journalists. We're talking about a population of maybe like a few hundred independent journalists that aren't working for Chinese state affiliated media that are covering a country with, 1.5 billion people, right? And a hugely geopolitically significant country. So every journalist that has to leave or is silenced in some other way is like a very disproportionate loss, I think, loss to all of our understanding of the country. And and then I think one of the things that I learned when I was a journalist there, like, I started my career there more or less. I very much had the mentality that I was just a cub reporter and that I wasn't going to be able to make that much of an impact in such a big country. But what I realized is that because there are so few journalists there, like kind of all of the foreign governments that are seeking to understand China rely very, very heavily on the press corps and the people that are writing about this publicly. So I think in that context, like the stakes are truly very high, and it's something that is definitely worth advocating for.
Yeah, I agree. I think that journalism nowadays has a bad reputation in our countries. I don't know why precisely, but it's the fact. And if they think of what the journalist can achieve in this kind of countries and the kind of very important insight they get, that others, diplomats, businessmen, etc., cannot get. So they could understand finally that this is a very important profession, in fact. So I think that many things would change in our worldview if we put in ourselves in the situation of looking to the current actual power structure in the world. And if you see that whatever we're facing now, it's so huge and so important that we need to put all our efforts to counter it and to try to save ourselves. Journalism is a very important thing. But also, I would say for the people who are hearing, who are now listening to us, even citizen advocacy is really important. I will give an example. In my own experience of a journalist, and when I came from China, when I was expelled and I came to France, I wrote some articles about the situation in Xinjiang, and I couldn't be really free to do that because even in a very enlightened society, in a very enlightened media, not everyone was aware of the importance of this topic. And it's because of reports by Mega and you and other people there that little by little, everyone understood that it was important. But for me, we had to wait until we knew that very young French people, like 13, 14, maybe even younger, were interested by the Uyghur cause, that finally I could do a cover story about the Xinjiang issue. So what I'm saying is that those young people, very young, sometimes really adolescent, even in primary school, who are interested by a topic. In France, it's a big trend that the very young people are interested by that. They can push, maybe not the governments, maybe not immediately, but they can push even important media to take into account the importance of a topic. And this topic of the Uyghurs has brought the young, it's by the hundreds of thousands of young French people to be interested to what's going on in China generally, not only about Uyghurs. Because you have the same problems with Tibetans, you have the problem with Christians, with Mongols, with even ordinary people whose children are being stolen to be sold to wealthy families. So you have this problem everywhere. So the fact is that the advocacy of young people about one topic will open their minds and their eyes and see what is going on, and this huge problem that we are facing now, that our governments do not want to consider, and the citizen can make them consider. I'm really convinced of that.
I guess my final words will just be like, an interesting side effect, I think, when so many like foreign like media are forced to at least temporarily, or at least like come up with a more creative way of like setting up their so-called China reporting team nowadays, because of such a high uncertainty that's surrounding the regulations and the stability of actually posting someone full-time inside China, is that it actually, I think, offers some Chinese nationals who used to only be able to work as a support role inside China when they're inside China because of the local law. Now that because their company has a bureau outside of China, and then the reporting of like China from the outside has somewhat has to become a new alternative for all the international media to understand that it does offer Chinese journalists an opportunity to really be recognized for their importance and the roles that they play, and the very unique knowledge and their ability to bridge the Chinese society with the international community. So many of these Chinese journalists are Western educated. They speak perfect English, but at the same time, they grew up in the country, and they still keep very close touch to what's actually going on. They're almost like putting their hands on the pulse of the country by observing what's going on the social media. They have a very unique way of understanding what's maybe behind a social media phenomenon that people outside of that context cannot understand. So this does, I think, offer an opportunity, I think, for the outside world to see China through these Chinese journalists' eyes and reporting. And I think that comes with a different kind of value. And like working at a place, a European media like DW, the other thing is that, while I think it's super important for us to continue to report in German, in English, in French, and all kinds of other languages for the audience outside, it's also, I think, equally important to report for the audience inside China, which is something that I used to didn't know until I worked with DW, that I have to start writing in Mandarin. And actually, most of our target audience are the people inside the Great Firewall. And when you actually realize that some of the most like ordinary stories happened inside the country is not even on their radar until some foreign media's Chinese departments start writing about it, it's very interesting to see that happen. And then I think it does, go back to what Ursula pointed out earlier, is that, we can't just assume that people inside China are all just like being censored and their access to information is completely lack and they have no knowledge at all about actually what's happening around them. But rather is, whether they choose to openly talk about it or comment on it or not, it is another thing. But sometimes, when we're working on stories like the Wuhan outbreak, when it just first came out, it was surprising to see how many Chinese citizens were actually willing to use different ways to connect with the outside world and share what's actually happening with the outside world. That's how I got to report on my reportings during the initial outbreak and the total lockdown over there. So I think it's very important for the foreign media to continue to engage with the people inside China, so that the access and the channel remains, even if your physical access currently is not possible to be fulfilled.
All right. Well, after so many important mentions and things that we all should definitely know and work with in the future, I don't really feel like putting more information on the table, and I just want to thank all of you that came today and enlighten us. And what you said is very important, and I think that I can speak for both me and Mikuláš if I say that we are absolutely supporting you and also the cause, and we will try to do everything in our power in the European Parliament and within the European institutions to support this cause. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for taking the invitation, and thanks also to all our followers who are following this topic. I believe it is very important, and we shall take care of, because the freedom of speech and the journalism are indivisible values, and if it is violated in China, it has influence all across the world. Thank you so much, and see you soon by another stream from the European Pirates. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.